Good evening, ZIG delegates, and welcome to the gubernatorial debate for the volunteer gubernatorial candidates. My name is Tyler Dorr, and I'm a program director at the CCE. I will be introducing the rules of tonight's debate briefly, and then passing the debate over to our moderator, Governor Hancock. Tonight, we have 4 gubernatorial candidates who will be debating. They will begin with a 2-minute opening statement, followed by 3 rounds of questions to which the candidates will have 90 seconds each to respond. Each candidate may use 1 rebuttal bonus during the debate, during which they have 60 seconds to correct a misconception or further clarify a piece of their policy platform. We will end the debate with 1 minute of closing statements from each candidate. The speaking order has been randomly pre-selected prior to the debate using a computer program. Without further ado, I will turn tonight over to your moderator this evening, Governor Hancock.
Hello, my name is Mark Hancock, and I'm the 67th Youth and Government Governor, and I'll be moderating the debate tonight. We will now begin with a 2-minute introduction. Mr. Barexa, you have been chosen to go first. You may begin when ready.
Hi, my name is Jack Barexa, and I'm running to be your 2021 governor. I'm really excited to be here, and although I know that nothing can match like the excitement and reward of an in-person conference, I'm still so happy to be in the space of ZIG again. And I want to start by talking about racial inequality, not necessarily just as a part of my race for governor, but because it's way bigger than that. I think that the central purpose of a government is to equalize. It's not a coincidence that the same community, which didn't gain codified civil rights until 50 years ago and was still mass incarcerated and gerrymandered and redlined and broken window police, just happens to have 3 times higher rates of poverty and 5 times higher rates of incarceration. Once we acknowledge the racial and wealth-based redlining that pervades so many parts of society, we can start to reparate. Each part of my platform attempts to equalize in some way. First, that means empowering Nashville's growing refugee population. Nonprofits are providing the education and job resettlement that the government isn't, and developing a public refugee support department is critical. And second, we need to change the way we delegate state education funds. Currently, all counties are given state funds and expected to raise their own local funds subsequently. As a result, rural counties and counties of color have severe funding shortages. We need to strategically delegate the amount of funding based on the amount of funding that county already has, giving more to communities with less. And the last part of my platform tries to expand opportunities to developmentally disabled students. That means a college-level transition program in the UT system, which ensures post-grad employment in UT's healthcare system. I'm running because I really think that what we do here is impactful. While I know my policy and my platform will only ever come to fruition within the Youth and Government volunteer conference, each issue and idea I and every other delegate brings up, I really think spreads awareness and inspires advocacy, then action, then hopefully change. And yeah, I would really appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Barexa. We'll now move to Mr. Hinton.
Hello, my name is Led Hinton. I believe that Tennessee, despite being a great place to live, has a few problems. And those problems have 2 main causes, in my opinion. First of all, Tennessee has suffered long enough at the time of cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all federal programs. The best people to decide what to do in Tennessee are people in Tennessee. This our state government has never been more feasible. 33 states have legalized medical marijuana, despite it being a Schedule II controlled substance at the federal level. The second thing that I would set out to fix is creativity of our legislature. Nowadays, every solution has become focused on how much money can we throw at a problem. In the problem of education, for example, there's lots of data to suggest that the amount of money per student schools spend has very little impact on their overall test scores, and that things like supporting them with good quality teachers and quality tutors has actually been proven to help a lot more. And while that doesn't necessarily sound as flashy as we donated $4 billion to our local school, it actually has had a lot more empirical impact. Things like school choice and charter schools are also things that would help this issue. My campaign focuses on working with people across the aisle to come to creative and pragmatic solutions that don't take a ton of money out of the taxpayer's wallet. Remember, a vote for lead is a vote for a smart, thought-out, creative solution. Remember, to get ahead, vote for lead.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton. We will now move to Mr. Hoppy.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackson Hoppy, and I'm serving as your Speaker of the White House at this year's Youth in Government Volunteer Conference. I hope that everyone is thoroughly enjoying ZIG thus far, and I hope that the rest of the virtual conference will go along smoothly. However, we are engaged in an election that will determine the future of our great state of Tennessee. Former U.S. President Abraham Lincoln once said, "I am a slow walker, but I never walk backwards." Under a Hoppy administration, I will promote a mindset of moving forward and progressing so that everyone in our state can succeed. I want to promote fiscal responsibility, taking money out of needless programs and putting it into programs that benefit Tennesseans as a whole, while also placing a key emphasis on issues like healthcare and education, and finding new renewable sources of energy. We can make Tennessee into even more of an attractive place for everyone and recover from our hard times if we work together. I will work day and night for you in order to promote unity and moving forward. A vote for Hoppy is a vote for both of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppy. We will now move to Ms. Pope.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all enjoying the conference and making the most of your Zoom in government. Several of the potential topics to be discussed tonight tie directly into my platform, specifically regarding education and environmental conservation. So I'm thrilled to share my perspective with you all. That being said, youth in government is based around representative government, so I want to hear your opinions. If any of the topics in tonight's debate spark your interest, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And if I'm elected governor for next year's conference, I'll make sure to listen to all of your opinions then as well, so that everyone gets to be a part of making YIG 2021 perfect. Similarly to my approach to my campaign, my opinions on the debate topics tonight are focused around the everyman and making sure that everyone gets a fair chance. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the opening statements. We will now move to the first question of the night. The first question of the night is about the COVID-19 pandemic. How do you think Tennessee has done in responding to the pandemic, and what would you do differently? Ms. Pope, you'll be the first one to answer.
Pandemic preparedness in Tennessee is a requirement by the respective departments of health and education. Each day, the plan is seemingly being rewritten by state and local governments, and at times it feels incredibly politically driven, placing commerce above public health. I recognize that amount of planning could have prepared any government for the ever-changing and unpredictable cause and effect of COVID-19, which we are currently witnessing. However, the targeted approach by the governor's office focusing on hotspots is understandable in the beginning, but the momentum of positive tests has shifted and the entire state is now one big hotspot, urban and rural communities alike. We need a statewide strategy for containing the virus that's not politically driven. But the best plan forward is containing health and wellness of the citizens is focusing on public health and economic recovery. I do think it's important that we mandate masks. And as far as the argument that it is a constitutional right to not wear masks, wearing a mask is the same thing as wearing a seatbelt. It is a government mandate to protect people. Additionally, I think we need more advanced testing. It takes 2 weeks to get your test results, and by that time, they're pretty much rendered useless. So we need to focus on changing with the times and adapting in each situation, but making sure that we have the most advanced technology for our citizens.
Mr. Bareksa, you will answer next.
Yeah, so I definitely think our state's response was slow, but I think in terms of testing, it was really good. And the plan I would take would be threefold. Firstly is diagnostics. We have really good testing right now, but we need to expand our capacity in Nashville and Memphis specifically, while still ensuring access in rural areas. From the beginning, Tennessee guaranteed free testing. That has to continue along with the statewide mask mandate. Public health has been overriding constitutional liberties since before we were born, and not wearing a mask isn't a constitutional liberty in the first place. We need more more robust contact tracing too. That means hiring regional teams who would ensure we can minimize spread and inform anyone who's at risk of getting corona. And then finally, we also need temperature checks required, I think, at like any open institution. That includes schools, public offices, and business. That's again just like creating a proactive approach. And then second, an integral part of our response is also the economic fallout. As a state, we need to continue funding the Tennessee Business Relief Program while expanding our unemployed insurance and benefits. I also think a green infrastructure stimulus package would be a really good, like, effective way to go about this. We have one of the lowest like debt per capita rates in the country right now, so we can afford to do some stimulus spending to reinvigorate the economy. And finally, the racial inequity reflected in infection rates just further accentuates the need for healthcare reform. If we talk about healthcare, I'll talk about it more, but a state-run single-payer system would not only act as a huge economic stimulus by creating millions of jobs, but would lower out-of-pocket costs and eliminate racially charged gatekeepers from preventing like life-saving treatment, especially in terms of corona.
Thank you, Mr. Barexa. Mr. Hoppy, you'll be next.
Well, obviously, we reopened way too early, and that we're obviously seeing the effects of that right now. The NAACP came out in April and May and said that they had concerns that the governor's stance on reopening could fracture the stay-at-home and social distancing orders, and that should be noted. And 70% of Nashville citizens thought that they moved way too soon into their phase 3 reopening, and obviously they moved back. And no matter who we elect, we have to realize that a lot will have to be done. And things aren't immediately going to turn back to normal. It's going to take a lot of time. And, on March 5th, our state entered into a crisis which we had never felt before. And our state changed as a whole. The future is uncertain, but we need to come together as Tennesseans. We need to continue closely monitoring cases, and we need to stop double casing, which is severely skewing the numbers. And this is testing a person twice and considering it 2 new cases. We need to continue to promote and even require masks in public and at work. And we need to do I think that we need to do whatever we can to try and reopen schools in a safe way, not everything immediately and not necessarily on time. And a lot of this plan would revolve around the development of vaccines and treatments, and we would work very, very closely with the CDC and other vaccine providers. And for right now, we need to fully utilize available and federal state grant programs already available to Tennessee businesses, and we also need to subsidize these businesses. We need to wear masks and stay safe and follow CDC guidelines.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppy. We'll now move to Mr. Hinton.
So I believe that while Tennessee's response to COVID was a little bit late, that overall it was pretty effective. If you look at the CDC's number on our cases, basically everything from the 10th lowest and the 10th highest ranked cases is all in about like 20,000 cases of each other. So we are ranked 14th, which is not very good. And I think that it's extremely hard to get a solution to this that will work, because the data on COVID has changed so much. For example, the World Health Organization originally said that you could not transmit it from human to human contact. Dr. Fauci, our lead on COVID, said that wearing masks was not something that we should be doing. So I think that it's going to be extremely important moving forward, figuring out the safest ways to reopen our economy, because while most of us probably aren't hurting too badly, the average Tennessean is really suffering from being out of work for this extended period of time. And the government stimulus can only last so long without bankrupting everything and having the economic fallout of this last way longer than any sort of health crisis that it has created. So I think that looking at a variety of studies and creating solutions to this that will keep everybody safe, most importantly, but also find a way to reopen in the safest and quickest way possible. Thank you.
Excellent responses, candidates. We will now move on to the second question of the night. The second question is, should the executive branch of Tennessee be strengthened relative to the legislative branch? Mr. Hoppy, you have been chosen to go first.
I would say absolutely not to this question. I think that excessive numbers of things like executive orders undermine the legislative branch, and they undermine our ideas as a true democracy at large. And we have seen in past months that executive orders can and will be issued. And I'm not saying that that's bad during a time of crisis. I just think that an excessive number of them is unhealthy for our state. And yeah, they're necessary, but I mean, yeah, again, just a lot of them isn't a good thing. And the governor already does have the power to veto and sign bills and laws, and regulations should be coming from the legislative branch, and things like that should be coming from the legislative branch. So.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppy. Ms. Pope, you have been chosen to go next.
Our government was designed around the checks and balances system so that each branch held equal power. You cannot strengthen one without weakening the other two. Designed as such to avoid government oppression and abuse of power, the Tennessee legislature once had to use this system of checks and balances to remove outgoing Governor Ray Blanton from office early to preserve the state's reputation for scandal. This just proves how necessary checks and balances can be and has been in Tennessee's past. You cannot strengthen the executive branch without weakening the legislative branch and consequently weakening the judicial branch, which would all together weaken the freedoms that we so truly appreciate here in Tennessee.
Hinton, you have been chosen to go next. You may begin when ready.
Yes, so I believe that the balance of the legislative and the executive branch is extremely important. I believe that as far as actual lawmaking power, the legislative branch should have a slightly more amount of power because that's constituted of like more people elected by the populace. It's a more accurate representation of our state, whereas the executive branch is it's just one person. But you also have to keep in mind that the executive branch is not just existing on a legislative point of view. It's also on a law enforcement point of view. The executive branch's job is to enforce the laws. So I think that in that aspect, the executive branch needs to remain strong in these times of Tennessee hasn't been that bad. There have been some higher rates of crime, especially in Nashville and a few of the bigger city areas. I think Knoxville had I want to say a 14% increase in crime over the past few months. So I think that it's important to have a strong police force during that time because the only thing that we know empirically to reduce crime is the police. That's the only thing that has ever reduced the amount of crime happening. So yes, I think that it's important to have a balance in the legislative eye, but that also, as far as enforcing laws goes, it's important to have a strong enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton. We will now move to Mr. Barexa.
Yeah, in terms of strengthening the executive branch, definitely not. I believe in really strong change, but only as willing by the voters. And I think Congress models the wants of the people way better than a branch that basically correlates to the leadership of like a single person. At the point when that person becomes like racially biased or incompetent or anything bad, it has broad impact on our government. And I think the congressional system leaves way more room for error and is set up to represent like each micro community within Tennessee. And I would actually want to take 2 steps to increase the power of the legislative branch. Firstly, that would be by introducing new legislative checks to veto power. And secondly, and I think more importantly, is by shifting the power and appointing judges over to the legislative branch. By giving so much gubernatorial power here, the courts have just become like another partisan tool to advance an agenda. And I think judges should be selected based on the closest account of what the people want. And the less partisan they are, the more sustainable. And then also, like, we need to still be ensuring that Congress is an accurate representation. And I don't think that can happen without more anti-gerrymandering infrastructure. The Supreme Court made a decision in 2019, which basically left it up to the states to ensure fair districting. And this is a really easy fix. Basically, we need to establish a nonpartisan districting committee with independent oversight that determines how to district in a way that comes closest to representing the true population. That means removing gubernatorial veto power from any districting decisions as well. The people who benefit most from gerrymandered districts should have no say in drawing them.
Thank you. Amazing responses, candidates. The third question of the night is about public transportation. Tennessee is one of the only states that doesn't have adequate public transportation. What do you think about Tennessee's current public transportation, and what would you do to change it? Mr. Barexa, you have been chosen to go first. You may begin when ready.
Yeah, so I think any public transit plan probably would start with Nashville. Most major cities of its size have already approved like expensive public transportation upgrades. However, Nashville is unique because although it's a large city, it has a really low population density. So that means the city is really sprawled out, making the introduction of public transportation a lot more expensive and a lot less efficient. So as a result, my plan would begin with changing zoning ordinances. To develop as a sustainable big city, we need to push for higher population density zoning. That means housing more people in smaller spaces and also incentivizing mixed use development. After allowing the city to develop under these ordinances for a while, we would have enough high density areas and new economic growth to fund a mass transit program like light rail or electric bus. Making the public transit green is critical also for like melding a trajectory towards carbon neutrality. And on that, I'll talk about climate change a little bit if I have time. My climate change plan would mean comprehensive reform in the energy sector. That would be through a cap and trade system first, which would basically give a comparative advantage to clean energy like water and solar energy, and also detract from factory farming. It would also mean establishing the Tennessee Green Fund, which acts as a multi-billion-dollar investment into green infrastructure and can also be an economic stimulus for Corona. Finally, I think this is like kind of simple, but fostering bike culture in urban areas specifically through the use of like protected bike lanes and conducive urban engineering not only helps with traffic and public transit, but also with making us more carbon neutral.
Thank you, Mr. Brexa. Mr. Hoppy, you'll be going next.
As more and more larger employers begin to tell their employees that they can stay home and work from home, traffic is not going to be as bad and it's going to die down, and larger roads and interstates aren't going to be as congested. An example of companies telling their employees to stay home is HCA, one of the largest companies in Tennessee. And I think with that, we'll be able to update and fix our roads and services a lot quicker when we don't see as much congestion. And with that, and we also need to keep in mind that adding more things doesn't necessarily fix everything. We see in Houston that adding more traffic lanes doesn't make traffic, or doesn't fix traffic. It makes it a lot worse. And we're already seeing that a lot of communities are already starting to introduce plans that favor things like pedestrian biking, like biking in traffic. Chattanooga is a prime example, and they have their own biking plan. And cities like Knoxville and Memphis promote biking and biking lanes, which is also another green alternative because it tells people, hey, we don't need to necessarily use a car. We can just bike to work, and it's healthier, and it's a lot more, and I think it's a little bit more green. And finally, we need to also acknowledge that a large part of the traffic is things like construction and how we fall behind on that. We need to be more accountable with that. And an example, I live off of a road called Franklin Road. And they've been building on it for over 2 years, and they are saying it's not going to be done until 2022. And I just think that for them to be building on a 5-mile road for 5 years is insane, especially when no progress is being made. And I think we need to be more accountable, and we need to work harder, and we need to work together in order to achieve that.
So as it is with any new infrastructure, building a large amounts of things like public transportation is very expensive. So I think that opening up a contract like this to a private company would be very beneficial, because the bus lines on average have a percent margin of about 7 to 10%, which for most businesses is very respectable. So the financial incentive for a private company to come in and build something nice is definitely in there. I also think that the focus on this transit should be more of like in low income areas, because statistically people in lower income areas don't own cars. And so it can make it very hard for them to get jobs because they're extremely limited based on where they live. And so that I think could definitely help raise some of our lower class citizens into the middle or even upper class. I think that, I think that a new public transit system would be very beneficial to a lot of Tennesseans for a lot of reasons. Also, I think that that's something that gets politicized a lot. And I think that opening something like that up for a private company to build it basically to us for free is pretty much a no-brainer solution. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton. Ms. Pope, you have been chosen to go next.
Although public transit is available in every Tennessee county, TDOT needs to reevaluate and revitalize each of the metropolitan region across the state. For example, public transit is in desperate need in Nashville and Davidson County, as we've discussed, but the needs extend beyond one county specifically. It's a regional issue because outlying counties bring in commuters from bedroom communities. If Nashville started building a better public transit system tomorrow, it wouldn't be realized for another 10 to 20 years, and it needed to happen yesterday. So, and communities need to be creative and provide incentives for van carpooling, offer telecommuting options, which is becoming increasingly popular during the COVID pandemic. And employers need to offer partnerships with public transit for free rides on city buses and encourage biking and scooter options.
We will now go to Mr. Brex's rebuttal.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to talk about a few things really quickly, basically around the idea of like whether the amount of spending really influences our impact. So firstly about education, the idea that the amount of like spending per pupil doesn't influence success is just not true. The Baker Institute found that just a 27% increase in funding for one student, or like for each student alone, would close the success gap and like the income gap that we currently see between rich and poor education systems. And then I want to talk about crime reduction really quickly. Like increasing police presences is really just a band-aid solution to this. I think people say police is the only like statistical way to reduce crime, but research found firstly a 10% increase in social spending alone can decrease crime rates by up to 5% because we're decreasing poverty. That is way more like statistical significance to crime rates. And then also I think police reform itself can have really big impacts on crime rates. We can look to Camden for this. Camden, New Jersey used to be one of the like most dangerous cities in the world, and then they completely reformed their police system like a few years ago by doing simple things like creating community initiatives to bring the police and citizens together. And only a few years after this top-down reform, crime rates went down by 40%. So I think all of this is like really important, but especially education spending.
Thank you, Mr. Berexa. Mr. Hoppy, you've chosen to use a rebuttal.
Yeah, so one key focus I'm putting on my campaign is healthcare. And obviously Tennessee ranks pretty low in terms of healthcare. We rank 43rd for best healthcare in the US. And we need to find ways to lower premiums and increase hospital beds per capita, as well as incentivizing doctors to stay here. We have great facilities like Vanderbilt, and we need to have more and more doctors come here so they can treat patients. But in addition to that, we also need to show that Tennessee is not a big pharma-friendly state. Big pharma is exploiting millions, and we need to fight them and make sure that they cannot exploit any more people. In addition to that, a new thing that we've seen emerge in the past couple of years is telehealth. And I think we should really be improving on this system because it's a lot cheaper than normal medicine, and it's a lot more direct when you're talking to a doctor. And an interesting fact is that patients don't lose the time of going to a doctor with telehealth. They lose $43 on average due to lost time and actually going to the physical office. And this obviously makes it seem like this form of healthcare is a lot cheaper, and I think it would help with Tennessee a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppy. Mr. Hinton, you've chosen to use your rebuttal.
Yes, so I just wanted to address a few other things about my campaign. So one big part of some things that I believe in is that while police reform is extremely important, I think that we also have to maintain a very high police force. So what I mean by that is that adding more social workers to our police force, I consider that maintaining a strong police force, like having people to specifically deal with the homeless, with the mentally unstable, and with people experiencing drug-related problems. I don't believe that those burdens should be bearing on the police, also on top of keeping our community safe. But the idea that police is like the only thing that long-term reduces crime is because in a lot of lower income areas, there isn't a lot of local business. And so the only thing to get business in, and that's what really creates middle to upper income communities, is having business invest. You can't have a business invest if there's high crime. So you have to have police come in and remove crime before you can have business come in and invest. Now, I don't think that that means that everyone should just be thrown in jail for just whatever. You have to do it right. But
fantastic responses, candidates. We will now move into the 2-minute closing statements. Mr. Hinton, you have been chosen to go first.
In these trying times, it's very important to remember that we're all in this together. Solutions to things like COVID and all the higher rates of crime that we're seeing in certain counties around our state, we have to remember that these problems are extremely complicated and that no one person has all the right answers. Working together and talking about these things like we're doing right now is one of the most beneficial things that we can do. If we all come together to think about these things and get our big brains working on solutions, the outcome is going to be much better than all of us fighting each other and working alone. Thank you. Remember to get ahead, lead.
Thank you, Mr. Hinton. Mr. Hoppy, you have been chosen to go next.
One of the greatest things about our democracy is that we elect those who serve us, and we choose who we think will exemplify servant leadership the most. My whole campaign is based on how I want to work for you, the great people of Tennessee. I want to be a leader for everyone in our great state. And I can lead us towards prosperity and success and out of the hole we currently see ourselves in. I want to thank my fellow candidates for taking the time to debate on issues facing our state, as well as the TNCCE, YMCA, for organizing not only this debate, but YIG at large. If you want a governor who will work day and night for you to see our state succeed, then I'm your guy. Vote Jackson Hoppy at the polls for governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoppy. Ms. Pope?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching this debate. I hope you enjoyed. And like I said earlier, please reach out to me if you found that any of these topics were interesting and you want to discuss it. My goal is to be an accessible candidate. And next year, if I'm elected, to be an accessible governor, to make sure that your voice is heard. Because a vote for Pope is a vote for you.
And finally, Mr. Barexa.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that everyone came, and this has been really fun, and I'm glad YIG's starting again. Just about my platform a little bit, remember that the idea of equality is only radical to the people who are benefiting from inequality. Like, one of the root ideas of my policy is that it addresses the root causes of problems. That means increasing social spending to decrease poverty, to decrease crime, not just slapping more criminalization on it. That also means like creating education and citizenship programs for newly settled refugees, because that's just adding entirely new groups of people who can positively affect society. By subsidizing marginalized communities, we're not only helping those specific communities, we're helping all of Tennessee, because again, that's empowering like entire groups of people to go out and positively contribute. The same idea of empowering others, I think, is really intrinsic at YIG. I like to think of everyone at YIG as having like access to a platform, but needing the officers to empower them enough to use it. The central goal of all my actions would be to empower, to give others a platform, to be an advocate, to like do whatever they want. Yeah. I would really appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Barexa. Great job tonight, candidates. I wish you all the best of luck at the polls.
And if I could just take a moment to thank our moderator for this evening, Governor Hancock. We appreciate your calm, cool, collected questioning. Thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. And to all four candidates, a fantastic job in the debate. Voters, it is certainly no easy task ahead of you. We appreciate you tuning in to watch tonight's gubernatorial debate, and we wish you the best of luck at the rest of the ZIG conference. Thank you, and have a good night.